Welcome to Healing with the Diamonds podcast. This show features Larry and Lynne Diamond, along with guests who are passionate about helping families heal together. Through personal stories and powerful conversations, you'll hear real-life experiences and practical tools for reclaiming health. Please note, the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your health routine. If you're enjoying Healing with the Diamonds podcast, we'd love your help spreading the word. Leaving a quick review or rating on your favorite podcast platform helps others find us and helps more families start their own healing journey. Thanks so much for listening. Now, here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. I am Larry Diamond.
And I'm Lynne Diamond.
And together we are Healing with the Diamonds, and we are bringing ancestral wisdom to families around the world. And it's our great good pleasure to have Gary Fettke. I think I pronounced that correct.
Correctly.
An orthopedic surgeon, and to me, absolute role model. And I will say folk hero from Tasmania. And Gary's backstory, that's really what I want our audience to know about, because I think everyone should know about it. And on two levels, there's the personal Gary transformation story, and that I don't think there's going to be anyone coming to Healing with the Diamonds that isn't in the process of growth. So I want to hear how you went from the chief cake judge at your hospital to low carb advocate to your orthopedic patients. So your personal journey, and then what happened when you did start advocating, or at least informing your patients of the agency that they had if they were willing to do lifestyle change. So personal, and then the folk hero saga story.
Well, it's interesting because that you want to hear the past history, when I'm actually very much forward looking. And Belinda and I were having a conversation just last night about, we've got a friend with a nasty cancer at the moment, and the family and friends are all going, why? And I've had my cancer journey, Belinda's had hers, and we've never gone why, we've never looked to blame, we've never questioned, we're just purely looking forward. So, I've started off on a philosophical moment, and you guys know me, the fact that I'll always end off on a tangent. So I haven't answered your question. I've immediately gone down a tangent of looking forward rather than backwards, because you can't do anything about what's happened in the past. You can learn from it. You can mold yourself. So, my story is, some may have heard it, some not. Essentially, I was a fat kid. You can't even say fat now. We can talk about the politics of the word fat now later on, how it's been commercialized against talking about it. But I struggle with my weight as a kid, not by today's society, but back in the 1960s, I was the big kid, in the swimming team. We could see I was clearly a little bit podgy, but nowadays I'd just be an overweight kid. Anyway, so I was on diets as a child. I exercised. I became quite lean as a teenager, but I was completely carb loaded. My mum died when I was a teenager, so I was angry at that time. And then I travelled the path of orthopedics, orthopedic surgery, medicine, and then orthopedic surgery. And in my practice, I ended up looking after most of the diabetic foot complications in northern Tasmania, which is an island to the south of Australia. And so I had a huge catchment area. My clinics effectively were called Fettke's Effed Up Fructose-Free Fungating Foot Folly Fridays. Never found out what effed up meant, okay? But nonetheless, I've been asked to write a small bio for a university reunion, and I specialised in everything that no one else wanted to do, which is a strange thing. I wasn't the sports doctor. I wasn't I did all that stuff, but I specialised in taking on the patients that no one else wanted to do. And part of that is, a significant problem of deep infections in joint replacement, deep infections in diabetic feet in particular. And so I regularly used to say, this is what I can do. This is what I want the patient to do. And ultimately that path, particularly, and it was a turning point, but particularly, and you're quite right, I used to be the cake judge at the hospital. I'm sorry, I've apologised to everyone for that. But I had a patient in his 40s that I was looking at amputating both of his lower limbs. And he's in hospital. We're trying to save his lower limbs, trying to get a bit of protein into him. And the hospital was feeding him ice cream 3 times a day. And that was the crunch point for me. I said, hang on, whoa, this is completely wrong. And then I was told they were the food guidelines for the hospital. That's the hospital food guidelines. They still exist mostly around the world. It's okay if you've got diabetes to have ice cream, biscuits, low fat, high sugar foods, out of control blood sugars. And then, so we're going back 15 years now, and I started looking into food and particularly sugar. I have a website called No Fructose. Fructose is half of sugar. And so I'd like to say I'm an early adopter. I'm not the first person in the world. We've got to go back to Banting in the 1800s who was onto this. Interesting, Banting went down that path because the surgeon who was advising him didn't want to become public. There's a little known story there. So I became interested in this topic. I started talking to the dietitians, trying to actually change the hospital food. They said, you have to change the guidelines. To cut a long story short, I went on this thing called social media 15 years ago, which is quite a foreign thing for an orthopedic surgeon to do. Within 48 hours, I was targeted by someone from the sugar sweetened beverage industry, the big one, Coca-Cola. He was working with them. Before too long, I was targeted by the cereal industry, and then ultimately by the cereal industry, the food industry, and the pharmaceutical industry, because I'm an orthopedic surgeon saying food, particularly sugar, is causing limb amputations. I wasn't a celebrity chef. I wasn't someone in the media. I was someone who was just sick and tired of operating on people who didn't need to have surgical procedures because of the food they were eating. And so in the process of that, I ended up being targeted. I was reported to the medical board on 3 occasions. One time I was reported because I inappropriately reversed someone's type 2 diabetes on national TV. I can't make up this stuff. I mean, this is what happened.
Did you have the Benny Hill theme song going through your head during that?
Well, I grew up with Benny Hill because that's something my father used to love watching. We'd sit down and watch Benny Hill, as same with my father-in-law. But it's just going, this is crazy. And so I actually thought when I first got reported, oh, this is ridiculous. They're going to throw this out. But they took it seriously, and they ended up getting the highest profile nutritional expert, a professor of nutrition for arguably the world. He was Australian-based originally, as the expert witness against me. So I'm supposed to be judged by my peers. And I asked the medical board, I said, where does this guy come from? And they said, well, and as it turned out, he just appeared. But there was a lot of targeting behavior. And then Belinda, who guys met, and she's infinitely nicer than me. She said, look, I'm going blue in the face talking about all this science. Others were in the same time frame. Tim Noakes in South Africa, again, being tried. Tim's case was in open court. Mine was behind closed doors in literally, Australia's is the home of the kangaroo court. So it's completely sealed, and it's like, can't find out what they're thinking. We're talking about the science. And so Belinda started researching behind it, and the expert witness failed to declare that he was working for one of the cereal companies. And we've gotten the minutes from the cereal industry, ultimately, which showed that the cereal sales are down in Australia and New Zealand and across the world, and that these 8 people are to be targeted, and I was the only doctor on that list. And we're talking about the CEOs Chief Executive of Australia Sanitarium, Kellogg's, Nestle, Freedom Foods, Australian Food and Grocery Council. We're not talking about their underlings. We're talking about the CEOs sitting down, having lunch together, talking about tactics. And I mean, all these papers have been presented to Senate inquiries, so it's all in the public arena if you go searching for it. And I was meant for targeting. And as it turned out, they even mentioned how they'd do the targeting and the journalists that would come after ourselves. And ultimately, it took 5 years of our life, and highly stressful. And behind us, you can't see, but this is a huge study area, and behind it was a table tennis table, and the whole thing was piled, 1.5 foot high in papers, just science, politics, and then you guys need to have a chat to Belinda about all the other influences which are actually making our dietary guidelines. So it became an absolute war zone. This was the war room. But as a result of it, after a fair amount of, well, not a fair amount, a lot of stress and fighting the system and presented to, 3 Senate inquiries involving the National Ombudsman, again, involving social media. The public outcry, being involved in social media was part of my crime, but also social media and the support of the people allowed me to put pressure back on the system so that ultimately, I was cleared and apologised to, but only after we'd pointed out all of the science. I literally did a PhD here talking about the science, the vested interest via Belinda, and all of this was laid out to the medical board, but they decided to ignore it all because I was guilty of the crime of advising my patients to avoid sugar. That was but ultimately I was cleared. Tim Noakes was cleared in South Africa, Annika Dahlqvist in Sweden. I was the last to get cleared, but that meant it's literally opened the doors for health professionals, not just here in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Sweden, but across the world to be able to give this advice safely.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm still supporting doctors all around the world who are still caught up in their medical regulators because they're advising this clean way of living, fresh, local, seasonal food. They're getting amazing results, but it's embarrassing for the establishment because the establishment wants everyone to just eat less, exercise more, and take more drugs. And here we can actually do the exact opposite, fractional of the cost with less side effects and infinitely better results. So it is fascinating. And along that way, I'm still half sane, but recognizing, to take on the establishment like this, we do need to we are a pair of crazy Tasmanians who have done it. Or someone, Marion Nestle, I was introduced to Marion Nestle, who's quite outspoken in the US. I met Marion and she said, "You're the Tassie devil," based on
I love it.
the Looney Tunes character.
Yeah.
And the world's much better for it.
Yes.
Well, information's now available. Again, philosophically, I'm very fortunate. I'm just we're just a couple of state school kids who are belting above our weight. But something I'm quite passionate about is information. So we are fortunate enough to have good information. We're fortunate enough. So, again, I'm fortunate enough to know now, and not just the biochemistry, but the benefits of eating real food. And therefore, I'm fortunate to have that information. I'm also fortunate enough to live in a society where I have access to it. And Tasmania, we're known for our fresh food. We don't have a huge cereal or sugar industry here. We don't have a huge, highly processed food industry. So we're literally in the best spot in the world. Nothing personal about you guys in the US. But I have been to the US and some of your food choices are suboptimal. So
No.
yes, of access, and we've got the financial ability to have it. Where there are huge parts of the world, I don't even have the information. And if they do have the information, they may not have access to it. And all that's available is ultra-processed food. And I've certainly done some foreign aid work, which is terrifying, where you find out that the Coca-Cola is cheaper than water. Highly processed foods are imported into these island nations when they should just be going out and fishing. So it's and they're told that having the vegetable oils and the rice and the highly processed food is better for them. That's a lie. And then you can see what we call it the blue continent, which is the whole Pacific Island nations. They are the most obese. They have the highest rates of diabetes in the world. Everyone thinks their countries, we've got higher rates of diabetes and higher rates of obesity. But the blue Pacific, the Pacific nations, our Polynesian, they rank 1 to 10 in obesity rates for the world, and they rank 1 to 9 in the world for diabetes. So what's number 10 on the list for the highest rates of diabetes in the world? Last time I looked at this. Here's a little trick question for you.
Per capita rate?
Oh.
Kuwait. So what's the interesting thing about Kuwait in the Middle East?
Lots of seed oils and Coca-Cola cheaper than
Well,
water.
they don't drink alcohol. They're an Islamic state. They don't drink alcohol, so they have a massive intake of sugar-sweetened beverages.
Yep. Yeah.
And so it's interesting that one of the countries with the highest rates of sugar-sweetened beverage intake actually makes it into number 10 on the diabetes rates for the world.
And that would parallel the global pandemic of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And seeing it younger and younger.
It's something like 10% of 8-year-olds. It's either 10% of 8-year-olds or 8% of 10-year-olds have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's almost a normal variant now, looking at liver ultrasound. Radiologists are sort of passing comment, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We're already seeing a change in the liver enzyme tests. They're just pushing it up a little bit to say, well, that's normal. Well, it's not normal. And it's a bit like vitamin D levels. It lowered the level to account for the fact that most people, particularly in more temperate climates, are vitamin D deficient. Maybe not you guys, but we're a bit more, south of the equator than you are north. Same thing with uric acid levels. Uric acid is a byproduct of sugar. Everyone thinks that gout is related to too much meat and wine and alcohol, but it's actually a byproduct of fructose metabolism. And so they're pushing up the uric acid levels of the normal, but it's not. 50% of the population, latest figure, 93.2% of the population are metabolically unwell. So 93.2% of the population have got too much sugar and vegetable oil in their diet, from my point of view.
I was going to go on a little tangent. I'm a student of history, and in the Roman Empire, they came up with the word decimate, which was 1 out of every 10 soldiers.
10.
And now you're saying 93.2 metabolically not well. So if the word decimate is 1 out of 10, I'm not sure what we could use to describe, 93%.
It's interesting in the Oxford Dictionary, because I'm great as a bit of study of philosophy with yourself. Decimate meant to actually knock off 1 in 10. That's what the Roman Empire did, knock off 1 in 10. So it's used all the time of going, decimate means 9 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 9. It's actually only 1 out of 10. I'm really disappointed to see about 2 years ago, the Oxford Dictionary has changed it to actually mean the majority, because the original form of it was 1 out of 10. Dictionaries change and language changes. So I think if you're following history, we'll both be disappointed.
Well, we're learning from history, and we're living in the present.
Well, I listened to a program the other day about history. The difference between history and English literature is one is non-fiction, which has been fictionalized, and the other one is fiction, which is being fictionalized. And therefore, whichever tangent you want to go down, literally, I thought you were going to tell me about the Roman Empire. We've always used sugar and carbs to calm the masses. Marie Antoinette, apparently, as far as I can work out, actually didn't say let them eat cake. Probably, but nonetheless, concept of let the masses eat, commoners eat cake. There's something in there about the royalty gets the crown land, which is the animal-based product, and the commoners get the commons, which is what can be farmed for cereals and grains.
Yep.
And lightly stocked farmed animals. So we've used that for a long time. But in the Roman Empire, apparently, when the masses started to rise up, they would have bread days. People were feasting on bread because the bread actually calmed the people. And the biochemistry of that is all the carbohydrates ultimately can get fermented, or there's a pathway called an aldehyde pathway in the liver, which produces alcohol. So we make wine from fruit via this fermentation of fructose into alcohol. If you actually eat lots of fruit, or even glucose gets converted, there's this aldehyde pathway. We actually produce in the liver, we produce alcohol, which is the cause of the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or one of the major components of it. History is interesting because we've been calming the masses by dumbing down the masses, or controlling the masses by controlling their carbohydrate. Another pet topic of ours is whoever controls the protein controls the people. And so this whole current agenda looking forward of plant-based proteins, and we know that plant-based protein is incomplete. It's incomplete, but if you can actually have people move towards a highly processed plant-based protein, they're not going to be stronger. Despite all the vegan arguments and the vegetarian arguments, they're not going to be stronger because they are going to be depleting their full protein profile. Anyway, I digress. Sorry, back to your tangent.
Yeah. No, we appreciate it. No, I love the tangents.
It's like you're in our house, and I think we have a similar dynamic. Kaylin's a lot nicer than I am, and I tend to
go off on tangents.
Go off on
Yes.
tangents. And like you, we share a commonality, not judging what people do, but everyone having access to good information. And then once they're well informed, then they can make their decisions. It's the misinformation that really gets to me. And I got to be careful on that word. Everyone can say what they want, but you were actually censored or attempted to be censored, and that's a whole different level.
There's misinformation, and then there's what I call disinformation, which is
Right.
deliberate misinformation. I keep coming back to biochemistry. Now, what I say, what happens inside the body, what happens inside the cell is biochemistry. It's fact. What happens outside of the body becomes opinion, twisted by vested interest, political, religious, economic, and even opinion-based. And I had a discussion with Richard Feynman and Eugene Fine in New York some years ago, and a couple of legends in this space. And Nina Teicholz was there at dinner. Gene's wife was there, and Belinda was there. And Richard and Gene are two professors in this space. And I started discussing with the fact that the null hypothesis is null and void. The basis of our science is complete. And after about 20 minutes of heated discussion, Belinda said, look, he's from Australia. He's trying to just start an argument. But I do believe it because they're not there to counter-argue me at the moment. To say, I actually think all scientific methodology is biased now. So there's a thing called the scientific method, which is observation, then hypothesis, and then you start drafting an experiment, and then the whole study right through to publication. It's all biased. So if you make an observation, it's based on your preconceptions. Arguably, our observations should be done by babies who haven't been twisted around by vested interest. Everything, and here's a little I'm supposed to find it. I'm just writing a note to myself because that's on tangents again. If you studies, which have been used in medical experimentation for decades, you get a different outcome if the researchers are male as distinct from female, because the rodents respond at a higher cortisol level to male researchers than they do to female researchers. So therefore, if a rodent study has been done in the past, it gives you a different, mind you, the women in my house, if a rodent comes running past or they see one, I reckon their cortisol levels go up more than the rodents do. Because we live out on a farm, so therefore occasionally there are mice that are seen. But we've got chickens. Chickens free range, and they knock out most of the mouse population.
Oh,
There's a ridiculous tangent.
No, that's good. But, kind of talking about your family and just how your journey, because like healing with the diamonds, the core of our mission is to heal together as a family. And family was a prime motivator of my husband and myself healing. And I was curious, how did your healing affect Belinda and your kids?
Again, multiple paths to travel there. When I started this journey of metabolic health, I had my own story, but when I was looking down the biochemistry, and I'll proudly say I'm the first person to describe the combination of sugar, refined carbohydrates, and polyunsaturated seed oils in combination, creating a perfect storm for inflammation. That's my crime. I said it's a hypothesis. It's a model of modern disease, a nutritional model of modern disease, because you can never really do the double-blind controlled study over 50 years to see if it's proven. What you can do is, however, you can take out sugar, refined carbohydrates, and seed oils out of your diet, which is ultra-processed food, and see if your health improves, which it has done for myself, yourselves. But you've got to imagine being in our house and being Belinda, because I first of all said, okay, we've got to get rid of all the sugar. And then I said, okay, so all the sugar went, all the cakes and all that sort of thing. And remembering I used to eat a family block of chocolate a day. I was also 20 odd kilos heavier than where I am now. But then I said, and then I came home and I worked out the seed oil component of it. And I said, okay, now we've got to get rid of all the seed oils, all the vegetable oils. But at that point in time, I still liked potato chips. So as I started looking for potato chips that had been cooked in a non-seed oil. The carbs have got to go now as well, because I've worked out this thing called the polyol pathway. And I can still remember Belinda sort of going, if you come into this house one more time and you take a whole nother lot of stuff out of the house, sugar, oil, vegetable, because everything's, when you start looking at stuff, it's in a whole lot of stuff. And if you take out, then you take all the carbs out of the house. But I can still remember her very clearly saying, if you take bacon out of my life, you're out. So the good news about bacon is I think that's fine. Everyone starts talking about nitrates and other chemicals in bacon, but to be fair, there are lots of nitrates in cruciform vegetables as well.
Yeah.
So we tend to, we can. Oh, the other thing is trans fats are bad. There's a lot of, can't have trans fat, can't have trans fat. Well, industrial trans fats are horrible. But in fact, there's a whole lot of trans fats that are in dairy product, which are actually documented to be good. So it's just terminology and twisted information. So anyway, we're still happily married for over 40 years. But we still have some bacon in the refrigerator. So Belinda was an enormous support because if you know someone over a long period of time, they tend to know each other. So one of the good things about being an orthopedic surgeon, the good and bad things about being an orthopedic surgeon is we're naturally arrogant. And that arrogance means that you actually back yourself to do surgery, particularly when we're on an island. And it's not massive, it's not tiny, but I was doing a lot of surgery which no one else was doing. So we also had to fly a lot of equipment in. So you have to back yourself because there's no one else to support you. If I do foreign aid work, you've got very little equipment. So you actually need to back yourself into doing it. So a lot of people say surgeons are egotistical and arrogant, whatever. That's the nature of the beast. You have to be to actually do the job. There's no self-doubt, not a lot of time for self-doubt. Not none, but not a lot of time. The thing is, one of the great things about that, the good side is if you know you're right and the rest of the world is wrong, then you're okay with it, which is what my nutritional journey was until I found my tribe, which is including yourselves. You go, okay, I'm not the only person recognizing all of this. So Belinda was an enormous support because she knew that she's got a nursing background, but she said, okay, I'm pretty adamant that the biochemistry is correct here. I'm pretty adamant because she'd seen the health benefits for me. She was hearing about the health benefits from the people that were adopting this around us. But then when the medical board stuff came, that was, a huge issue and a huge stress to the family. 2 of our children had already left home. As a family, we have apologized to our children for giving them sugar and seed oils in their growing up. Interestingly, our girls are pretty on board with it. Our grandchildren are being raised on low-carb, real food. Our daughter married into a farming family, so we've got good access, and we've got to stay on their nice side, so we get, fresh lamb and organ meats that get delivered up in a little freezer bag. And I trade medical advice for their organ meat, so it's all sort of works out. Our grandchildren, Kate's pregnancies were low carb, so she needed a bit of biohacking through a glucose tolerance test, but sailed through. I did a research sort of talk based around morning sickness because of her, which is on YouTube. And people said, you're an orthopedic surgeon talking about obstetric problems. I thought, well, now hang on, this is the best study you can ever do to see whether or not ketosis is safe. So if a woman's pregnant and she can't eat, she moves into ketosis, called fasting by another name, and I measured Kate and she was in ketosis and all of this. Anyway, if you ever want to do the experiment to work out if low carb keto is safe, the best way to experiment is on unborn babies. You'd never get it past an ethics committee. However, if you look at the results of severe morning sickness, there are tens of thousands of outcome studies, or not tens of thousands of women that are involved in these studies. And the old wives' table is, don't worry, the baby will be fine. Well, guess what? If you're in deep ketosis, which I think is the safe mode of pregnancy, God saying to women, when you first get pregnant, actually get off all the garbage in life because you feel so sick, moves into safe mode actually, and the baby's development is primarily dependent on ketones. The brain development, the cellular.
Beautiful.
And as it turns out, if you are in women with, again, tens of thousands of results to look at, they are more likely to go through to term. The baby is more likely to be of normal weight. They're less likely to have birthing problems. They're less likely to have deformities. They're less likely to have health problems and they tend to be smarter in their formative years. Whereas the flip side is gestational diabetes, which is, again, that's mostly third trimester, but those babies are more likely to be high and low birth weights, more likely to have miscarriages, more likely to have birth defects, which are most likely cardiovascular, which is environmental rather than genetic. and they're more likely to have obesity problems in childhood and more likely to have learning difficulties. So we've already done this study to prove the safety of ketosis in pregnancy. And as I said, you never get this study past an ethics committee, but you don't need to because it's already been done. I had quite a few obstetricians. I lie. I had about 3 obstetricians contact me saying how dangerous I was for talking about it. And I had about 20 obstetricians say, thank you very much. I'd never understood that. From a family point of view, our 2 grandchildren, they're 5 and nearly 8 now. I'm teaching them to question authority, which is an interesting. I do card tricks with them. I know. Well, I'll tell you how it's already backfired. So I do the card tricks with them. I do science experiments. We're mixing sodium bicarbonate vinegar the other day to make carbon dioxide in balloons and stuff. And because I'm getting them to question what they see in front of them. And the 5-year-old, she had recently had a timeout, in kindergarten. And I said, darling, why did you have a timeout? I was rolling my eyes at the teacher. And I'm going, yes. And anyway, our daughter said, look, I understand, Dad, that you're trying to teach them to question authority. I get that. I understand that. But I'm the authority in the house. So I sat them down. I said, the 5 and the 7-year-old, I said, look, we've got to have a discussion here. Mum is the authority in the house. You're not allowed to question her. However, your father, who's my son-in-law, you can question him as much as you want. And then, but I think I think you alluded to this before. You wanted to know how our family were coping with all of this because we're a small, well, not a small community, but we're a smaller community here, and my name was in the paper. It was front page news when I was getting banned, and my practice copped a bit of a battering for a while because people said, I couldn't just be about sugar. He must be a bad person. Came back, but it was actually only about sugar. I was pretty hard on my patients over time because I said, look, this is what I can do. This is what you have. I'm okay with that. That's okay. But I used to have patients who'd come to see me because they wanted to have someone hard on them about losing weight and getting control of their health. That was it. I found that really interesting. Like people say, no, I know you won't operate on me until I improve myself. So that's why I've come to see you. I said, okay, I'll be hard on you. So it was in fully informed consent. Again, patients are over the age of 18. I say, look, these are the options for you. Let's say if you've got poorly controlled diabetes, your risk of infection goes up 20-fold if we do the operation. Or if you get well controlled, and if your knee replacement gets infected, I'm going to have to amputate your leg, or I may have to take your leg off. So what do you want to do? Do you want to get control of your diabetes and reduce your risk of that complication by however fold? Well, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? It's just, but unless they've been given the option,
Exactly.
That's the thing which has driven me insane with the system, is that you need to be telling people that this is an option. And we've done that now, and we can talk about where we've progressed to actually being able to change the guidelines at an international and national levels. So it's not just, so if you're not told about this as an option, now you're negligent. The doctor does not tell you in Australia, this is my take on it, does not tell you that your diabetes is reversible or at least completely controllable with therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, and they don't tell you that option. Well, I think that doctor's now negligent. Now, that's harsh. But again, we've got this into guidelines now. So our children, again, every Christmas, because this was in the public eye, and Fettke's not that common, okay? So it's pretty, are you Gary Fettke's son or daughter and whatever? So what was really good is they were actually still proud that their parents are actually troublemakers. We think, well, I don't know, they had never told us that we've embarrassed them. Daughters do tell fathers that they are embarrassing, don't they, Larry?
Yeah.
I've been told that we're embarrassing sometimes, but they've never told their mother that the mother's embarrassed them, but fathers are different. But I still remember one of the Christmas, our son, we said, look, it's been a pretty tough year. And I can still remember our son going, Dad, I reckon they can hurt you a bit more. Keep going. It's an interesting family discussion when they said, you can see, because it was tough. But the fact is, if you've got family and they think that you've got a bit more resilience in you and there are times when I've been down and Belinda's been up and vice versa. It's very, very rare that we've both been down. That's very rare. That's solid, isn't it? I don't even know what the term for that is. It's not love. It's just, that's a union.
Exactly.
And so I'm very, very fortunate that
A
Belinda's been my
partnership.
partner in crime.
Yep.
Definitely a partnership because, I remember my grandmother when we were talking way before I was in a long-term relationship and talking about the amount of energy put into her marriage or a relationship. And she said the whole idea of it being 50-50 is not correct because some days you're giving 80% and your partner's giving 20%. Other days your partner's giving 90% and you're giving what you can. But it's about knowing that percentage and knowing what your partner needs and hopefully being able to counteract or and support when during each of those times whatever percentages that you are able to give at the time.
It's interesting that supporting Belinda has required zero effort.
Oh,
And I think she'll say the same thing. It's just what you do. Like we're going through life together. And I can't think, maybe I'm completely naive, maybe I'm just a male, that just doing the right thing and being there for her when she needs me has required zero effort. But funny, but I haven't thought about it before, but you're making me think. I was going, "No, okay, that's just
Well,
easy to help her."
when you're on the same frequency, you just described the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, Uwei, effortless action.
Mm,
You guys
mm.
truly love and each other's, soul and mission. And so supporting it is just a natural extension of that kind of mutual recognition.
You can see how fiercely she'll defend me over time. I'd much rather be on her good side than her bad side.
yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I think Larry feels the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, so but speaking of your wife Belinda, she's currently writing a book. Is that correct?
Yes, if anyone's smart in this whole low carb universe, they contact Belinda to find out if they're about to have a debate or a discussion or with someone, they will contact Belinda to find out the vested interests of the other side.
Okay.
And many people, when you have a discussion with them, wear a hat. And they may not even know why they wear the hat. It may be because of the way they've always been brought up. So I used to get angry at people who have opposed me. If I know I'm firmly rooted in biochemistry and the results and benefits and whether or not we're talking about environment or science or outcomes or medicine, if you oppose me, that's fine. But I'd like you to justify why you do that. And often I'd like to know why you believe that. Because we've all got opinions, that's fine. I know why I've got an opinion. I like to base it on as many facts that I can work out to be factual. That's, tricky as we alluded to before. But so many people have opinions, but I want to know why they have opinions. What formulated them to have their opinions? What environment have they been brought up? What textbooks have they been exposed to? What literature? What podcasts? Whatever. So I think I've got far more of an open mind now because I understand dietitians. It's not their fault. All of their textbooks have been written by the processed food industry. I get doctors now for being naive because all of their textbooks since 1910 have been written by the pharmaceutical industry. Once you realize that your entire education has been conflicted, then you can start looking through things with a different lens. It makes you incredibly cynical, very cynical. And I admitted to Belinda the other day that I'm very annoying. I think I'm annoying. Once I realize, hang on, this is not right, I will be very annoying until I can be convinced that I'm wrong or I can try and do something about it. To be fair, I'm getting a bit tired of being annoying. But one of Belinda's quotes is, we're tiny. We're just a couple of mosquitoes in a room. We're just a couple of, as I keep saying, state school kids in the backwater of Tasmania. But what's really interesting as being little mosquitoes are tiny, but it's really hard to go to sleep with a couple of mosquitoes in the room.
I love it.
And that's all we've been doing, just buzzing around. But they've tried swatting us a few times. Now, literally, the cat's out of the bag. You guys are doing this podcast. Others around the world are communicating this text. There's a textbook out about it now called Ketogenics. I was fortunate enough to be one of the co-authors of it.
Awesome.
Receiving no financial benefits. I point all this out. It's been a huge journey for the last 15 years, but ultimately gotten to meet some really cool people.
I
That's
apologize.
all right. It's the medical board contacting you saying stop communicating with you.
This has been absolutely delightful. You mentioned patients, if you have time for just a couple more questions, this has been fascinating. You mentioned patients seeking you out. I'm wondering if you mentioned the cat being out of the bag, young people wanting to go into medicine, seeking you out, wanting to be biochemically based, as you said, people have informed consent. Has that been happening? Have you seen younger colleagues seeking you
There's
out for advice and so forth?
there's a few tangents again. So I've supported more than several, let's say many doctors around here in Australia, New Zealand, around the world, Canada, US, India, Nepal, France, South Africa, who've all been done over by the system and helped them with their cases. So that's good that people all around the world have reached out. Um, there's a there is a growing awareness that we need to get back to our grassroots. And one of the things I keep talking about is that we pay more attention to what fuel we put in our cars than what we do in our bodies. And there's now this recognition that nutrition is actually a bigger part of it. Unfortunately, we're up against a huge conglomerate plant-based industry who are pushing a narrative based on ultra-processed food, religious ideology, poor biochemistry, and an ecological argument, which I think is completely flawed and very much cherry-picked data. But people are more interested in nutrition now than they were 10, 20 years ago. When you talk about young doctors, have been approached by several doctors over time who are in their training in the hospitals who are on board with what I'm talking about or what we are talking about. But they say every time they raise the question of cholesterol or statins being no good or whatever, they get hammered by their senior colleagues. And I said, okay, but I say, I get it. You've got to get through. However, when you are through, I want you to promise that you raise the flag again. It's a slow thing. A doctor in Hobart came up to me, which is our city to the south, a couple of years ago. Cardiologist, I still remember it very clearly. He came up and said to me, Dr. Fettke, he bumped into me. And he said, I just want to let you know that as a cardiologist, there's not every single day I say something to my patients which you taught me. Bearing in mind that the university took away my lectures because I was talking about nutrition and healing and well-being because they said I wasn't teaching the curriculum. I said, I am teaching the curriculum. I teach the curriculum for the first 5 minutes of the hour lecture and cover it. This is the salient points you need to know about neck pain or whatever. But hang on, this stuff is really important that I'm about to tell you. So I thought, so that was, I mean, he's in his 40s, so I can't barely call him a young doctor. There's a talk of mine on YouTube called The Failure of Medical Education. That's a few years old, and I've given that, and I gave it an updated one last year to 500 medical students in Melbourne at a national meeting. Let's say about 5 or 6 years ago, I gave a talk about, again, the failure of medical education to the National Medical Students Association. I didn't have enough students turn up to it. And at the end of it, and I really point out the vested interest, how their medical education has been completely conflicted by industry and ideology. And at the end of it, I had about 2 or 3 come up and said, well, what do we do now? The last one I gave, which was to Melbourne University, and we had, several hundred students there. And Belinda came along to it. At the end of it, we were inundated with questions, and about 25 or 30 of them just came out en masse and migrated with us, and took Belinda and myself probably an hour and a half to get away because they were hungry to know more. So you ask about the youth, because if you go into the hospitals still now, I still find it a disappointing environment because there's not enough people questioning. Universities used to be about questioning and discussion and debate, and now it's about read, repeat, reward. It's just follow the paradigm, follow the guidelines, follow the textbook, but completely forgetting that the guidelines and the textbooks have been written by vested interests who are not interested in you talking about the basics. So I gained a lot of energy from that, to see how many students were hungry to question. I was also, part of one of the slides there, a couple of the slides, I pointed out that one of the deans of medicine here in Australia had received $225,000 from Novo Nordisk and Pfizer in personal consulting fees over a 2-year period. And my question is, without swearing on your podcast, what
Mhm.
is the gatekeeper of education here in Australia receiving this amount of money from the pharmaceutical industry? I question him to his face. I send him an email. Are you stopping my lectures from going forward because of this amount of money you've received? So I'm banned from giving lectures at that university because I challenged the professor. However, someone else happened to get hold of my entire slide deck and gave the same lecture. Now, we get around all this.
Yeah.
I like it.
Mosquitoes.
Yeah, the
pesky
mosquitoes. The
Oh,
mosquitoes.
hang on. It's called, we transfer file. Here, how about you have this entire deck and just take it over there? A bit of hope. There's certainly a lot of madness in the world. I think whilst we still have access to relative free information through a variety of platforms, social media, YouTube, internet, understanding that there's censorship coming from left, right, and centre, understanding that there's misinformation, disinformation, which is coming from left, right, and centre. Well, that's what I want to just say, from left and right. I think it's really hard to have an open mind because it's very hard not to be opinionated. I just find it a real struggle. I mean, I listen and read to an enormous spectrum of information, including in the low carb community. Belinda's just come back from Low Carb USA, where she gave her talk on the blue zones. And, you guys have got to get her on there when she's finished the book. She's banned from actually doing any podcasts until the book is done.
We just consider her booked when she's done. We want her on.
It's along the lines of who decides what we eat, who decides why we eat what we eat, and who decides what we eat, when we eat, and why. And it's just fascinating. I live with her. Like, so she's just, did you know this? Did you know that? Did you know this? It's just wonderful to see her brain completely on fire. Sometimes she's there knitting away for the grandchildren. I say, look, you're just a little old granny, knitting away, taking down the world, So she's a beautiful person. She looks completely innocuous, but I tell you what, her research is phenomenal. And I think fascinating. Whether or not everyone in the world thinks it's fascinating, but to me, if I've been conned, I'd like to know why. I'd like to know how and who. And unfortunately, our dietary guidelines for 100 years, but particularly since the food pyramid, has been a complete and utter con. And that's fine if it was just a con, but it happens to have been what you guys have heard me say, if you eat by the food pyramid, you're going to die by the food pyramid. Along the way, you're going to look like the food pyramid. I do think our 93.2% metabolic health problems is primarily related to the food we eat. And when you realize the whole shenanigans have been completely made up, then I think her work is pretty cool. I'm not sucking up. I'm not saying that because I'm married to her. I do think her work is just phenomenal, because once you realize you've been conned, scammed, whichever way, you won't do it again. You won't let it happen again. Benefits of actually, but don't get scammed again. And we're going to be constantly exposed to public health scams, and we don't have to. The recent years have shown the amount of control public health is trying to create in our lives, and they have done for decades. But nonetheless, it's don't get conned again.
Is that the working title of the book? Is the Don't Get Conned Again? I love it. Do we know when it's going to be published?
No, we're still trying to work on a title. Sorry, she's given me input into my talks, and I generally listen to her. When I give her input into hers, she sometimes listens to me. Part of a good, sound marriage, I have insight.
I just wanted to honor your time, and I wanted to thank you for being on. But if there's something else you wanted to add, please do.
Oh, look, I'll just give you my mantra, because I've been brave enough, silly enough, arrogant enough to write the dietary guidelines for the world, including the animal kingdom, because you need to get everything across in a soundbite. And so in one sentence, if we're all going to look for better health, whether or not you call it an ancestral diet or a proper human diet or an evolutionary diet or whatever, in essence, it is to eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food based on your culture and environment, avoiding added sugar and processed food.
That's a great soundbite, and that's what we want to do in a nutshell.
That's my message to the world. That's the right fuel for your car.
It just reminded me that in the 1980s, I believe, maybe 90s, there was a groundbreaking type 2 reversal study of Aboriginals. I forget the lady who did it, and it was either a month or maybe 2 or 3 months on eating local whole food, and I think there was around 10 people, and all 10 of the Aboriginals reversed their diabetes.
Mm. But that's not convenient because that it requires work. To quote Karen Zinn from New Zealand, empty pantry, full fridge.
Ah,
There's something in that. And it does require work, but we have refrigeration now. When I describe that, eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food, most people, you've got to delve into that. But I've actually described low carb, healthy fat. I've described an animal-based dietary lifestyle, and it's open to interpretation, but it's a fairly innocuous statement that I said. It's holistically correct, but when you take it apart, well, what is fresh, local, seasonal, whole food? It becomes animal based because you take out all the food miles of vegetables, you take out, a whole lot of chemicals out of the equation, you're taking a whole lot of seasonality out of it. And the only thing which is seasonally available all year round is an animal based product. And historically, cultures, this is what, I'm not giving away too much. Belinda said, don't give away too much about the blue zones. The blue zones, the historical blue zones are all animal-based, despite the Netflix series saying they're plant-based. No,
yeah.
I'm sorry, they're actually animal-based. And if you've been selective and you've corporatized the whole blue zone concept and you have a economic and political and religious agenda, hang on, that's not fair. That's disinformation. And that's what drives, that's what I was about to say drives me insane, but then that people will say, like, it should be committed. But it's just because there's so much of it. Look, it's an interesting journey. I think I'm glad I haven't done it by myself because you need someone to bounce that off, around. The kids, not just our granddaughter, but our kids have rolled their eyes at me from time to time. Oh, Dad. But that's okay. On the whole, I found out some things about my family. My mother died when I was young, but my grandmother stood up against the Nazis in Germany. My mother stood up for a lot of immigration policy here in Australia. And it's really interesting to see that the apple hasn't fallen far from the cart, far from the tree, sorry. And I didn't know any of that until I'd already been on this journey for 20 years. So you find out that is that genetic or maybe some of this craziness is. But whether or not it's social justice, I don't know. Belinda and I sleep well at night because we think we're doing the right thing. People might think we're a bit misguided, but we generally pop into bed and go to sleep and sleep pretty
Well,
soundly.
I think I definitely sleep better knowing that you guys are out there doing the work, buzzing around everyone and getting people to stand up, sit up and take notice. So we appreciate the work you've done.
Well, we don't do that work now without handing the baton on to others. So a lot of our work is passing the baton on to others who are going forward with the message, not just here, but
And here at Healing with the Diamonds, we're all about wanting to share this information and let people know that you can take control of your health and it doesn't have to take a program or a product. And there's information out there for free. And you don't have to feel like you have to be elite to have good health and a full life. So we appreciate the information that you guys have shared, and we'll definitely have Belinda on when she has her book. And just thanks for being here.
well, you took the old dining table and the family and community around the table as a point of sharing, not just the food, but it's also life and adventure and discussion and opinion, isn't it?
Very much so.
It is. And my way of thinking is we're all quantumly entangled. So the work that you're doing, your resonance literally does change kind of the fabric of the world. So you should both sleep very, very well indeed.
I don't think it's us. I think it's we.
Well, thank you very much. All right.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for being on. We're going to go ahead and sign off. And thank you to everyone who is listening. We look forward
And
to being here.
Thank you guys for your time this morning, or it's tonight, last night for you, morning for us. So I'm
Gary,
actually, I'm from the future. Okay.
I say that to my Australian and New Zealand clients all the time. You're from tomorrow. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so the good news is tomorrow's still here.
Well, we may or may not edit this out, but
Oh, that's fine.
I know what I was about to say. You guys really are heroes of ours. So thank you for being you. And yeah, we
Well,
appreciate.
thank you for following up on catching up on when we originally did, which is more than 10 years ago, I'd say, wasn't it? When we
Yep, I
first
still
met.
remember the Breckenridge where it was as cold as Siberia. That was the
Oh,
one.
that's right. That was my slide, wasn't it? I think I said no. That was warmer than Siberia. I said it was minus 18 here, but I checked up the weather forecast in Siberia that morning. It was minus 23 or something.
Yeah,
I thanked everyone for the warm reception because we could have
The
been in
warning.
Siberia. It was something like that.
yeah, I do remember that. Gary, give our best to Belinda
Okay,
for sure.
guys. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. And we'll
Was here